Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss I Know This Much Is True, starring Mark Ruffalo, John Procino, Rob Hubel, Gabe Vizio, Catherine Hahn, Melissa Leo, and Rosie O'Donnell, directed by Derek Cianfrance. Now, this is a show that's available, or a miniseries, I'll say, that's available only on HBO Max. So, if you have an HBO Max subscription, you can always watch this. But for now, how do I feel about the show? Let's get into it. The show begins in the early 1990s in Three Rivers, Connecticut, when the identical brother of Dominic Birdsey's named Thomas, both played by Mark Ruffalo, but Thomas suffers from paranoid. Let me see if I'm saying this right. Schizophrenia. And when Thomas takes his medication, he lives his life in peace and works at a coffee stand at a hospital, but if he doesn't, he creates episodes of illness like in a bookstore where he chops his own hand off, as it scares the hell out of everyone in a bookstore, for example. And the performances by both the Mark Ruffalos is tremendous, as Dominic visits Thomas at the hospital, and the doctors make Dominic sign some papers to be admitted to the hospital, but he refuses. And this opener tells me if I'm in for something dramatic and too damn tragic. And we go back to around 1949 when Dominic and Thomas were kids and living with their abusive stepfather Ray, played by John Procaccino, who's married to their mother, played by Oscar winner Melissa Leo, as she treats Thomas right, whereas Ray is the abusive motherfucker that treats everybody like shit. And these are great performances by the actors. Dominic narrates about how his family is cursed and he helps his mother on getting a new kitchen as she doesn't want to redesign the new kitchen. And she shows Dominic a file that tells her father's life story, which is in, which is in Italian, until wants to go upstairs because she doesn't feel good. And we move forward to Dominic showing a scholar to look up some Italian words for $400 now, starting now. And she says it'll take about a month as the mother goes to the hospital and wants to go home, but Dominic says it's better here at the hospital, which reminds me of people what I know when they're at the hospital. They want to go home, and Dominic calls the scholar Nedra about how she is going to about how it's going to discovering some Italian words. And the cinematography is very good for an HBO show. And I have seen a season and a half of The Sopranos, and I haven't had time to fully finish it off. But from what I saw, it's a great show, as this is a good miniseries from HBO, in my opinion. Dominic shows Thomas their mother at the hospital and tries to take him to her, and Dominic yells at Thomas, and because he didn't want to see his mother at the hospital, and runs out of the fucking car and the highway, which is super fucking dangerous, and runs into the river, and eventually goes to McDonald's to eat. And Dominic's friend Leo, played by Rob Hubel, shows Dominic Leo as an actor as on a commercial on the TV until Nadra comes by Dominic's place because her place has been broken into as she wants Dominic to not give his Italian papers to his mother. As they order pizza while he has an ex-wife named Dessa Constantine, played by Catherine Hahn, while she starts to dance and begs Dominic to dance with her, as well as she kisses him, and I get the impression Nedra was ripping him off from while flirting with him at his own place, but the acting in this is actually pretty good, surprisingly. Nedra leaves this place all embarrassed because she kissed him, and she accuses him for sexual harassment when she came in onto him and acted all hysterical and drives home all drunk and shit. And the next day comes, and Dominic asks what happened to Nadra as she reassigned with their mother and is not doing very well, unfortunately, passing away while Ray wasn't there for her while she was dying. Like, that motherfucker just walked away. And I'm thinking to myself, is he just an asshole to begin with? And the weird thing is, Thomas wasn't there either, as Dominic tells him their mother passed away the day before. While mother was drunk, while Thomas was drawing, and we move on to Dominic getting Nedra to give back the Italian papers that she had from him, as she never returned to the university. And he goes to Ray and shows Thomas talks negative about Thomas in front of Dominic, as this guy's fucked up in the head and he's such an asshole. But the actor John Procaccino does a good job with the role. Dominic finds the dog in the van of his ex-wife Dessa, and they reunite and talk about Thomas's fucked up situation and catch up with one another. And the writing is surprisingly great, as it feels realistic, and I like that about the show. As Dominic kisses Dessa at the wrong time, and eventually Dessa gets in the van and drives away, as Ray doesn't want to see Thomas. And why is that? Because he was abusive to him because of his disability, as that was Ray's choice. And I get the impression Thomas is suicidal right off the fucking bat. While Dominic visits Thomas in the hospital, doesn't let Dominic see his own brother, as they put him in the fucking handcuffs. And they go to a place as Dominic reads the Bible to Thomas. And this scene, because of the tremendous acting, the cop acts like an asshole to Thomas and Dominic, as they put him in a place for the criminally insane, and they treat him like shit. As Dominic argues about putting Thomas in a criminally insane place, while Thomas leaked himself in. This episode ends on such a sad note, but it works for a drama. Dominic narrates while going to New York as kids about how they cross 3 states, while kids pick on Thomas, as Dominic says he ruins everything in a field trip, as he looks at himself in the bathroom on the bus as they pull over and gets the driver involved to help the field trip to the ferry is ruined, because they go back until eventually Dominic tells him he doesn't know which is left versus right, as the classroom goes on the ferry without Dominic and Thomas. And we move forward to Dominic waking up next to a naked woman named Joy Hanks, played by Imogen Poots, as he gets in the shower, and Joy wants Dominic to chat with another woman while having an argument. And I like the childhood scene more than the scene with Imogen Poots. And typically, I like her as an actress, but her character was wasted. Dominic gets a call from Lisa Sheffer, played by Rosie O'Donnell, who's not terrible in this, as she was in other movies, but my favorite performance from her will always be A League of Their Own. And she asks him to visit her, as they talk about switching doctors while he wants to take Thomas to his primary doctor. And they have an argument about how Thomas is freaking out about being in a mental hospital, as Dominic is very upset because he has to stay there for a year or maybe 15 days. And she calls Dr. Patel for an appointment, with Dominic. And Rosie O'Donnell doesn't come off ruinous in the show like she was in A League of Their Own. Dominic goes to a writer named Ruth's house and tells her husband he'll be done in 6 weeks, tops, while painting their house, as Dominic goes to Leo while at work, and he's a car salesman for advice on how to get Thomas out of the mental hospital. And his boss calls him about his horror movie audition, which was actually funny to me, as he goes to his own doctor appointment and they take pictures of his injuries put together by the guards at the end of the previous episodes. And an hour of each episode is actually good editing for an HBO TV miniseries, with 6 episodes, as this is a good-looking show in my opinion. Dominic goes to the office of Dr. Patel as he falls asleep and dreams of being with Dessa while having their own child, which is a little girl who unfortunately died in her sleep, and having the funeral at a church, which explains part of why they got separated, as Thomas explains how their little girl was not murdered, but died from sleeping. And Dominic attacks him, but people push them back and while visiting Ray, and think about having another child, and they hung on for over a year. And Dessa goes out for a walk with the Dougie as she went to a dead baby growing group therapy, which seems very fucked up in so many ways. As one night, Dominic drives off to get to the river, and they try to go on a trip to Greece, but Dominic says no, but he ends up taking her to the airport, and eventually he wakes up because of Dr. Patel and going into our office and to talk about Thomas being in the mental hospital only because he wanted to cut his own damn hand off while they're having tea. And here's the tape of what Thomas said of her to her while he believes he's cursed, as this show is written smartly, as it takes the drama very seriously. As Dominic gets home and Joy has some people over at the house, and they get into a heated argument and dump each other's asses, I thought. And honestly, after what he went through, I don't care whether Imogen Poots is in the rest of the show, as she comes off like a bitch to Dominic. But chances are she will be back in the show, so, and be a little bit more ruinous than it turns out to be. As a kid, Thomas had a crush on a girl in third grade named Penny, and Dominic was jealous about it as he told on her for stealing Oreos from another kid as she gets suspended from school for 3 days, and she never returned to school ever again. And we learned she was murdered for some reason at all, and all the third graders went to her funeral, even Dominic and Thomas. And we move on to Lisa telling Dominic how the library isn't pressing charges as good news, and he has a hearing of Halloween Day and is getting kicked out as the bad news. And Lisa tells Dominic he doesn't belong in the mental hospital for the criminally insane, as she wants to get Thomas the fuck out of there as heroes. And here's a script about how it's a bad place for him. And it feels encouraging of Lisa to finally believe him when she should have from the beginning of when Thomas was there. And so far, this is a pretty decent show. Dominic asks a maintenance worker named Ralph to show him he smokes a cigarette being given by a John Wayne looking asshole. While we flash back to Thomas graduating high school as we move on to one of the neighbors who was in Vietnam and was killed there while Thomas made a fuss about the typewriter their mother got for them for their graduation, as he never fucking used it. As Leo takes Dominic to a place to score women, as Dessa happens to be their waitress, and Dominic almost gets into a fight with some punks who touch her in the ass, and throws her some rocks at the river, and gets back to the bar while Dessa's car doesn't start, and they talk to each other, until eventually she gets her car started. And the chemistry between the two young actors was very well done, as the chemistry by every single character as well as was well done, which makes the show watchable. Thomas talks with Dominic about how he met a girl in college years, and we go back to Dominic talking with Dr. Patel as he confesses on how Thomas never met Dessa once in his lifetime, and he cries about it, and that's a powerful performance in this scene by Mark Ruffalo. And we get to Dominic hearing messages from Leo, Ruth, and others as he gets together with Leo and plays a game I'm not too familiar with, as he brings up his audition while Joy surprises Dominic and asks him if she can come back to the house. And he gets a call from Lisa about visitation for Thomas, and he visits her and he talks with her about Thomas being in a facility. And was the scene with Joy necessary? This one was, but the rest, not so much. Dominic and Lisa visit Thomas as he's miserable there, as he looks at and he asks for a jar of water, and he wants to wash himself. And they ask about the hearing of whether or not Thomas belongs in the mental hospital or not. And he talks like he doesn't belong there based on what the Bible tells him. And Dominic tells him to not say any of that bullshit to the people that judge whether or not he belongs there, as he confesses they're torturing him in the facility. and he said they raped him in the facility. And I get the impression Thomas is disabled, like autistic, something like that. As this visit scene was dramatic for those purposes, which isn't always an autism thing, but yeah. We flash back to college years as Thomas wanted to type on the typewriter, but he can't find a way the key to the typewriter as he breaks the damn thing. And Dominic isn't upset with Thomas, but tells him to calm down, and he writes a paper for Thomas's class as it scares him. But it gets the impression a different person wrote the paper, and he turns it into his professor, and we go back to Dominic and Joy back together for some random reason. She makes an Italian chicken dinner for him, and he brings up how he saw his brother, and she doesn't care for Thomas. And Joy wants to have a conversation with Dominic, telling him she's pregnant with the smoking while smoking a fucking cigarette, and he doesn't seem to give a fuck about it at one point as he asks if he's the father, and he walks away from her, and he's upset, so she gets upset as well. And later that night, he sees teenagers over playing loud music and toilet papering his car, and sees Joy deciding to leave the house with a TP'd car and drives away. And despite their teenagers, what an asshole thing to do as he drives all drunk and shit. And this is a good show, while it's sad for damn sure. Dominic goes to the stairs and Dessa's house stares at Dessa's house, and hears the dog barking as she comes out wondering who's there, while Dominic is worried about the baby he has with Joy, as he's afraid it'll die like what happened to him and Dessa. And Dominic thinks about when he was married to Dessa, as they have sexual intercourse, as they got his sperm taken out of him while they were working so damn hard to have another baby, while he is driving until he crashes his truck. And I like Catherine Hahn in this show more than I like Joy, despite I really like both actresses, as they're good in their roles, but Dominic fucks them up his own way. But it makes total sense on why Dominic and Dessa got divorced, and that worked for me. We open with Thomas getting abused by Ray for not very good grades, and the mother pays for it by making her clean up the mess he made, which is fucked up on his part, as Dominic hangs out with Dessa as Thomas watches the whole thing for the whole summer. And Dominic pairs up in a room with Leo, while Thomas wanted to pair with Dominic. And Thomas calls him a traitor and cuts part of the table with a knife, while Dominic tells Thomas to put the knife down and wrestle to the point things are going to break, until Thomas calms down, and Dominic is afraid Ray will go ape shit about a broken chair, as Thomas makes a point saying he is him. And we move on to Dominic's hanging out with Leo. And where is this scene going? When Dominic is in the hospital, that sort of bothered me, but not too bad. While Lisa asks about Dominic a whole bunch of questions about how his body hurt, how badly it hurts, and the pills, when the water Sean Tedesco, played by Gabe Fazio, pulls up and tows Dominic's truck while bringing up Joy and how famous she is at the gym and he works at. And these scenes are, with the flashbacks, were melodramatic, but I like we get back to what the fuck happened to Dominic, while In was a little annoyed. Well, he is a little annoyed by how he didn't get to the fucking hospital. Ray gives Dominic a ride home while he has to go to the hearing, while Dominic acts like a jackass, and we flash back to the draft special on the Vietnam War. And luckily they don't go to war, as Thomas is approached by Leo and he's drunk and talks some shit while drunk and acts crazy. And Dominic brings up how Thomas is a smart guy, as Dessa comes in and Thomas starts to dance, and the show lied about how they never met Thomas and Dessa. And Ray drops Dominic off at the Ruth household, to paint the house, and the owner Henry is having a bad day and doesn't want Dominic there now. And the people he's painting for seem like a he's painting for seem like a couple of assholes, but it looks like a nice house. And I do like the production design and set decoration in that scene, as well as the whole show. Dominic climbs up a ladder and thinks about things going on with him, and I'm like, oh God, nothing is gonna. Oh God, don't tell me something's gonna happen with him, nor the house, as he breaks a piece of house. And he flashbacks to Thomas dropping out of school, and the man of the house shoots himself dead, and Dominic falls down to the ground, and that felt like a little predictable, as he dreams of someone helping him out, and he wakes up at the hospital, all bruised up. When he wakes up, and I'm like, finally, this guy gets out of the hospital, and the nurse gives him a popsicle. And Dominic asks what happened to him, while the nurse can't get to the fucking point. And Dominic learns he's been knocked out for days. As we learn, it's November 3rd, and he's anxious about what happened to Thomas, and promises if he's on duty by morning, he'll help make a phone call. By the next morning, as we learn, it's nighttime, and works as a dramatic show, like I keep saying again and again. Dominic calls Lisa while his next door roommate Steve overhears and helps him introduce him until Lisa calls and hears upsetting news about how Thomas, and he feels out of it, and he pushes the green button like the nurse advised him to do at one point. And we flash back to Dominic visiting Thomas at home as he cuts his own teeth, bleeding. And he wakes up Lisa visiting Dominic at the hospital. And he hears some bad news from Lisa, which puts him in some place worse for Thomas himself. While Dr. Hume put him there and ignored her as well as the staff. And this is a tough sit down to watch for this entire time. But at the end of the day, it's a decent show. Don't get me wrong, but it's fucking depressing. Thomas and Lisa are in a room, with Dr. Hume and the other staff members at the mental hospital, and he says Jesus speaks to everyone. And he answers to good voices, not evil voices. And Dr. Hume says if Jesus asks Thomas to kill someone, then they said yes, which comes off naive to him. And Thomas will stay there at the hospital for over a full on year, while Lisa says to Dominic she got involved in Thomas's case, as Dominic asks Lisa to take his daughter out for a special day, and she promises him that to him. And we move on to Dominic and Thomas hanging out with Ray and their mother to have a pub picnic in a place in which I don't necessarily get. And Dominic wakes up to Joy visiting him at the hospital and apologizes by talking negatively to Thomas, as Dominic confesses he has failed him. And she gives him pretty good advice about worrying only about himself, but he refuses to do so, as he knows their baby doesn't belong to him. And he tells her about Dessa and how their daughter died at a young age, and she leaves them. So they finally break up, and thank God, because Joy was just wrong for him from the get-go. While Steve watches President George H.W. Bush on the TV, as he learns Dessa is Steve's girlfriend, or maybe not. No, that's not right. Steve has a girlfriend, his next door neighbor at the hospital, and she was married to Dominic at one. No, let's move on. And how does he know that? Because their dog recognizes him. And we move on to Dominic taking all the wires off of himself as he goes on a walk and takes out the bandages along with using the restroom and washing his face off, as it looked creamy. And as it turns out, it was just a dream. And Dominic wakes up and Steve sees Nidra as she brings back the Italian papers, and she took them in the first episode. And it took me till this scene to realize that's Juliette Lewis from Natural Born Killers and From Dusk Till Dawn. And when I saw her, I'm like, she's in this? But there was something in this episode I didn't necessarily get, but it was nice to see for Dominic to see Nidra again, and he gets his Italian papers back. And I liked that she had a purpose in this show after all. We start episode 5 in a church with some Italians arriving in America, coming from New York on a ship and taking a train to Connecticut to get some work and live their lives in Connecticut, as one works in a factory and another is a farmer as they build their own houses. And I'm thinking, is one of them the grandfather of Dominic and Thomas? Because I honestly don't know what the fuck is going on. This, as the father, I guess his name is, let me see if I'm saying this right, Vincenzo, something like that, or maybe it's the grandfather. Stared at women like he's a pervert of some kind, and a couple of cops just shoot his friend's ass dead while having sexual intercourse with Vincenzo, taking his pet monkey and throwing it in the river. And I don't care for that flashback, as I don't need it for the show. We move forward to Dominic smoking a cigarette while driving to Dr. Patel's office. As he gets there and it crutches, and he gets news of Thomas doing much better at the hospital. Dominic is afraid of facing Thomas after he tried to help him, but he failed him, as Dr. Patel wants to talk about Dominic. And what does he need? And I'm betting this first 10 minutes of this episode is all about the grandfather arriving in America, as it was devastating. And Dominic says he believes he's an asshole, and his origin in America is fucked up. And Dr. Patel believes Dominic, like his father is or grandfather, is a violent man. And who the fuck is she to say he's a violent man? As that doesn't sound professional of her to say. And we go back to the origin story of the grandfather Vincenzo in America before they met their mother and had them as his kids. And it looks like he's a terrible person, and I don't like the character that much because his origin is just fucking depressing, as this origin story is just dead in the water in my opinion. And I don't know what his origins, and we have to discover what he wrote in Italian at one point. Dominic gets a call from Ray as he leaves a message with while Dominic watches the news. And we go back to Vincenzo as he makes his boss meet a woman as well as raping her. Oh, Jesus. While Ralph calls Dominic about Thomas needing a doctor, as he goes to Lisa and he tells her he wants Thomas tested to see if he's abused. They test him on his blood and sees if he's been abused. And this is perhaps my least favorite episode of any of them because it's so banal. And again, I just don't care for this origin story. Dominic is back at home and continues to the Italian origin story as of Vincenzo, as the woman whom I'm guessing is their grandmother, whatever, is pregnant, as she attacks Vincenzo while his boss is laughing at him getting attacked, and the grandmother, whose name is Ignazia, is upset with Vincenzo, and he asks if it's a boy, and she locks him out, and he smacks their maid as she curses him with acting abusive towards her, while Vincenzo is out, and the baby is out of the womb, and it's a baby girl. Well, unfortunately, Ignazia died, and we move on to Dominic seeing Dessa as his door, and he invites her, and they talk. With their dialogue is sweet, and I like how much they have chemistry with each other because it works. Dominic admits his family is cursed, while his life has been screwed up for him in particular, and learns Thomas is fine and not being abused, which isn't saying much. And he shows up to Ralph and to ask him questions about what he saw while with Thomas, that the John Wayne looking motherfucker broke into his room repeatedly, as Ralph breaks Dominic about it, and he wants to sue the mental hospital and asks Leo to help him out by being part of his lawyer, and he reluctantly agrees to help him out, and he says Dessa's boyfriend splits up with her and by definition breaks up with Dessa, which is an interesting choice. Dominic and Leo follow Dr. Hume by car, acting like a lawyer, as they ask him questions about the situation with Thomas and demands Thomas being out of the hospital. And they have a meeting with Dr. Hume as well as Lisa, and they get him out of the hospital. And Lisa disagrees with the decision while she tells Dominic he is arrogant. And Thomas got goes free and thanks to the arrogance of Dominic, and he asks Thomas he does. What does he want to celebrate his freedom with? And Thomas says he wants to go to the falls. And again, least good episode, but it ends on a satisfying note until one more episode comes. Episode 6 starts in a cemetery where Dominic and Thomas visit Thomas's friend Penny, and I learned Ralph was her brother, and we get to the falls, and Thomas says to Dominic, "Is Jesus forgiving you and saved you?" As that is a gorgeous shot scene at the falls, and Dominic brings Thomas to his apartment as he throws away the origin story of their grandfather in the trash can, and he sleeps on the couch at Dominic's place with the TV on, and next thing you know, Dominic wakes up with Thomas getting outside as Dominic calls the cops, and they find him in the falls as Thomas got himself killed. And what the fuck was the point of getting Thomas out of the fucking hospital at this point, as that bothered me this entire final episode. Dominic and Ray gather up at the funeral for Thomas and get some guests there that know Thomas, including Dessa and her sister, and he cries while on the phone with Dessa because he misses Thomas too damn much. As we get to the funeral of Thomas and the cemetery, as Lisa happens to be there, and the service felt reasonable, but the pastor, as I like the scene for how seriously the show took it, while the flashback to Thomas hearing Ray abusing their mother as he was abused by Ray, as Dominic witnessed it, and which is too fucking dramatic. After the funeral, they have the service at the house they grew up in, aka Ray's house, as Dominic is too pissed off at Ray to a point he says some negative things about Ray as the motherfucker abused him as a kid, and Dominic tells everyone at the service, and they suddenly leave the house while Ray never visited Thomas once in his lifetime and abused Thomas, like I said, as a small boy. So to me, it feels pretty hypocritical of Ray to have a service for Thomas at his own motherfucking house, as Ray feels guilty and cries for guilt, which is obvious that Ray is bullshitting around. And the actor John Procaccino does a good job of playing fake guilt after abusing Thomas in the first place. Dr. Patel, Lisa, and Dessa try to calm Dominic down as he and Dessa wash dishes together, and says how he'll never forgive Ray as the family is cursed, and Dessa believes he'll end up like Thomas. Eventually walks out of the house and continues reading the origin story of their grandfather, Venensko, being a cursed man because of his daughter. That explains a lot about who Dominic and Thomas's mother is, and who Venensko is as their grandfather. And it does take a while to understand, despite I don't care for it in general, but it makes so much more sense than in the last episode. While their mother had a guest as a little girl who happens to be a boy, Venensko kicks him out and says to never go near her ever again, but he eventually throws out the maid, and the mother has a little girl, has to feed her own godforsaken father, and he gets her a present of an instrument to bang on, and they practice it together, and she grows up taking care of Venensko until he grows older, and we learn she's Sicilian. And that's the end of the story, and he tells Dr. Patel while he visits her and confesses his life is fucked up because of a family curse in the beginning of time, and she gives him very good advice about giving kindness to the world, despite his completely fucked up, and he has a free choice to live in a better world, which is genius dialogue. Dominic goes back to Ray and looks for him at the house, and he finds him in the hospital and has Alzheimer's disease and doesn't remember Dominic, as he's led to believe it's football season. When they're in May, which is basketball playoffs and as well as baseball season, and we learn he had a heart attack by the doctor, as he says for Dominic to put him in a group home, and he encounters Dessa while she works there, and they talk about what happened to Ray, and he apologizes for everything he said to her, as well as what happened to the little girl. and he's never been around as well as a lot of things. And he confesses it was all his fault, but she forgives him. And everything that has happened to them, he says he loves Dessa. They visit Ray in his room, and this is a very nice scene, sad but nice. Dominic sees Ray in a group home as he practices walking as he shaves his face, and Ray says he called Dominic and Thomas double trouble as he drives them to plays like Charlotte's Web, supporting Leo as he played Wilbur the pig in that play, as well as to have dinner together. And he likes being in their group home, while with Ray asking Dominic to take the house from him when he passes away, and Dominic doesn't want to live there, as he confesses he won't live much longer while being in the dark, and doesn't want to tell Dominic and Thomas as she was dying as soon as she did, as Ray confesses her father didn't know Dominic exists, but not so much. Thomas and Dominic learns their last name was Penny's last name, as he was their father to begin with, which happens to be Drinkwater, and his real father was Henry Drinkwater, and Dominic visits him in the cemetery, visits Ralph as his new job as a construction worker, and tells him his father, Henry, was his father. And Ralph confessed he hated Dominic and Thomas for what they were and wanted to kill them, but he couldn't because they were connected until... And Dominic drives away asking if he can visit him sometime, with Ralph accepting, as well as Ray finishing off the painting job, and gets back together with Dessa, and they had a baby, and they hold a baby together, and this ended up being a decent show, but how decent? Let's talk about it in a rating. I'll give this show a 7.2 out of 10. The performances by both Mark Ruffalo is tremendous, and the other actors were great in this. Even Rosie O'Donnell, whom, other than A League of Their Own, is terrible in other shows, but the acting in this was pretty good, and the cinematography is actually very good for an HBO miniseries show, as it is a good miniseries in my opinion. The writing in this is surprisingly great, as it feels realistic, and it's written smartly, and it takes the drama very seriously, and I like that about the show, as this is a well-acted show, and the editing in the show is actually good for an hour episode HBO miniseries with 6 episodes, as this is a good-looking show in my opinion. This is a pretty decent show, and the chemistry by the actors are very well done and makes the show watchable, and it surprises me how much it's a recommendation for this miniseries for show for 6 episodes. But Joy, aka the Imogen Poots character, isn't necessary in the show. Maybe a few scenes, but as far as the rest of it, probably not. At the end of the day, as this was a good show, as it's dramatic and sad for damn sure. And don't get me wrong, it's a hard but nice sit down to watch a show, as it's not meant for entertainment purposes. But at the end of the day, it's a decent miniseries. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time we'll be back with Roofman, finally. And until then, do not commit suicide, ladies and dude-mans. Do not do it.